Okay. There are a lot of things we can talk about. The scripture reading this morning, I mean, this idea of Judas betraying Jesus, we know Judas as a traitor. If you were to ask which of the apostles do you least expect to see in heaven, his name would probably be the one that everybody would say, and we would say that, hey, he was a traitor, and we don't expect to see that. But there's a question that we can ask at times like this, and the question is, what could have been? What could have been? We know where he was before, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. There was a fella, he was a big man on campus, a quarterback with a speed like a gazelle, and his moves left would-be tacklers holding on to nothing at all, just air. He had an arm like a rocket launcher. He had the looks of a male model. He had it all. But then he went to the dogs. Literally went to the dogs, and in dogfighting lost his career. He hit the boxing world like a haymaker. Oh, he KO'd the competition. Most of the fights that he was in didn't even last past the first round. Some of them within 20 seconds he had already knocked the other guy out. They called him Iron Mike because his fists were so hard and because he was so aggressive in the ring. Then one day he was arrested for rape and drugs and carrying a weapon and creating a nuisance, public brawling. His life inside the ring fell apart. Next thing, he's famous for biting off people's ears in the middle of a boxing match. He burst into the college scene like a Mack truck. The first player ever to be an All-American in baseball and football. The first player, at least from his school. He was so great that he was a hands-down winner of the Heisman Trophy when the time came for the trophy to be handed out. He signed for the first time a contract to play professional baseball and professional football. And then one day, as he was close to the goal line, a really freak accident happened and a really freak injury happened. And although Bo knew everything, Bo didn't know how to get over that thing. At 9 years old, he debuted with his brothers, and they sang a song on American Bandstand. And everybody loved him and them. In fact, they loved him and them so much that they had a number of #1 songs. Later on, he became a solo artist. He sold many, many #1 songs, and in fact, the biggest selling album of all time is still the album recorded by Michael Jackson. But then something happened. He started a string of bizarre operations, and he became a surgical freak in so many ways, and that's what he was known for. And at the point where he was near death, all he was known for was the potential, because of the accusations, of being a pedophile. She was one of the brightest stars of the figure skating world. She had won 2 world championships. She was at the top of her game. But there was one lady that she had trouble beating. And so she hated Nancy with all her heart because Nancy could beat her. It didn't matter that Tanya was a world champion twice over. It didn't matter that she gave the best performance of her life. The people applauded for Nancy and not for Tanya. They treated her like chopped liver. So she hired somebody to take a baseball bat to her competition and to take her out. Something snapped in her. And there were others. Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper and Richie Valens got on an airplane in a storm. You'd say, hey, that wasn't a good idea. Well, it wasn't a good idea. Hank Williams, Marilyn Monroe. This last Thursday, a friend of mine's daughter was on her way back to ASU. She's a senior. She was a senior at ASU, 21 years old. Went home to visit family for the night before, got up the next morning to go to school. Honor student at ASU, a senior about to graduate with honors. In a car wreck, and she's dead. And it makes us wonder, what might have been, what could have been, Oh, and let's don't forget, Marilyn Monroe and James Dean. And how soon sometimes things are cut off. What do they have in common? They all make us think about that. What could have been? What might have been? John Greenleaf Whittier wrote, of all the sad words of tongue and pen, the saddest is what might have been. And how true that is, because we don't know what could have happened. But they're the commentary on so many lives today, for Christians and non-Christians. People start out with so much promise. We have so many blessings in our lives. We have so much hope. We have so much potential when we're born into this world, and so many never reach their potential. Some lives are a sad commentary on what might have been. Judas was such a man, and that's who we're talking about today. We need to see him down this road of tragedy a little bit as who he could have been. Imagine what happened with the rest of them. Peter and James and John, with all of those, Matthew and the other James, and you look and see what they did. Those 12 men turned the world upside down. Judas could have been a part of that. He had a portion in that. He was numbered with the 12. That's part of our reading today, that he was one of the 12. He was no less and no more than any of the rest of them, and he had all the same potential and all the same opportunities and all of the same blessings that any one of them had. And he wasn't a bad person. He did some bad things. But I don't think we see him as a bad person when we look, because when we look at him this morning, we're going to see a side of him that maybe we don't always look at. That's part of my job, is to help us see what we might not see unless we study deeper into the text. What happened started with jealousy and hatred. We're not even starting with Judas. It started before Judas. The chief priests and the scribes, these are Sadducees. They're not Pharisees. The Pharisees were in the synagogues, as Judd has pointed out in class. The Sadducees pretty much controlled the temple area, and the Sadducees had the scribes. The scribes were generally considered part of the Sadducees, or the Essenes, and they didn't like Jesus very much. In fact, they wanted him dead. They wanted him dead. They hated him. When there's hatred in the heart, it has a way of finding its way to the surface. It has its way of finding its way to the surface in the things we say and in the things that we do. It has its way of finding its way to the surface in the way we treat others and in the way we look at them. We see the worst in them. We justify ourselves because of our hatred. And that's what they're doing here. Hatred wants to hurt and kill and destroy, but the roots of hatred usually run deep. Hatred's not usually something that happens because you cut me off in traffic. I may get mad, but I don't hate you for that. Hatred usually runs deep, and in this case, their hatred ran really, really deep because it was caused by jealousy and envy. There's very little that can cause deeper hatred than jealousy and envy, and we see it here in all its ugliness. Even Pilate recognized later on that it was out of envy that they handed Jesus over. Mark 15 and verse 10 and Matthew 27 and verse 18. The old saying is, sticks and stones may break bones, but words can never hurt me. Well, yeah, that's maybe true, but Jesus reminds us that words come from our heart. What comes out of a mouth comes from our heart. Those words might have the potential of hurting me, because those words may tell me who you really are and what your heart really feels towards me. And those words can, in fact, in some cases, destroy me. I think nowadays we're more familiar with that than we have been in the past, as we live in a world where we're more concerned with what we say sometimes than what we do. I'm shocked as I look around the world and I see people, they walk out of a store with merchandise that they stole, and nobody's allowed to stop them because they might hurt their feelings. That just doesn't make sense to me. But we look at that. Here we are in a world back then, sticks and stones, oh yeah, they could break your bones. But the words they had came from hearts that were full of hatred. And that's where the words came from. Their hatred was so deep that they're willing to participate in the murder of an innocent man. Oh, now they're not going to break the Ten Commandments. They're not going to commit murder because that's an unforgivable sin for them. So they're not going to commit murder. They've got a way out. Somebody else is going to betray him. Somebody different than that's going to condemn him. And somebody different than that's going to put him to death. And our hands are clean. We didn't do anything. We didn't break the commandment. Really? They could justify it that way. We would never justify it that way, right? Well, I didn't actually do it myself. No, we would never do anything like that. And yet it happens all around us all the time. The only thing that slowed them down was cowardice. Cowardice. They were cowards. They were afraid of the people. They were afraid of the people, so they didn't do it themselves. Maybe they were afraid of God breaking that commandment, so they didn't do it themselves. They were just afraid. They were cowards. By the way, when you start listing that list in Revelation 21, 8 and 9 and following there about the ones that are going to hell, cowards are listed right there among them. They were cowards. It started with jealousy and hatred, but it was facilitated by treachery. It was a big step down for Judas. You know, it was a step of misplaced values, and that's where we're going to focus the rest of our time pretty much here this morning. Values are important. Values are very important because they determine our priorities and our vision and our mission and our character, and everybody has priorities. Everybody has values. You know, values are, maybe it's your job or your family or your health or maybe it's your activities that you're involved in or something else. Everybody has values and priorities. We have those, and the way we determine the order of our priorities is what's the most valuable to us. And you can look. I had a preacher friend one time, he made a comment from the pulpit. He said, "Show me your checkbook and I'll show you where your priorities are." And there's a lot of truth in that. Where do we spend our money? Where do we spend our time? What do we spend our conversation on? What are we spending our lives on? You can tell where our priorities are a lot of times if you just look and see what we do. We may not see it, but others see it. And what happened here is Judas's values ended up misplaced. Character, really, in a short term, is the sum of our values. What do we stand up for? What do we stand for? What do we do? How do we act? How do we speak? How do we treat others? It's a sum of our values. If others are valuable to us, we treat them with value. If others are not valuable to us, we do not treat them with value. If things are valuable to us, we treat them as valuable. If things are not valuable to us, we treat them as invaluable. And the result is that life goes on, and we can see where our values really are and where our character really is. You know, if you value hard work and honesty and integrity and seeing a job through to the end, then you're probably going to have a little bit different character from somebody else that values self-praise and getting their own way and getting to the top of the heap at any cost. Probably going to have a little different character than that other person is. Your values are different, so your character shows differently, and the results are different. Judas had priorities too. Judas had values too. And I think sometimes when we look back, all we see is one side of the picture. And I don't think we see and what happens is we generally blow Judas off as having poor values. We say, well, he didn't have very good values. You know, he was greedy, he was whatever, he wasn't really a follower, he was whatever it is that we say about Judas. We generally take him and just kind of throw him by the wayside from the very beginning of talking about him. As a matter of fact, when we read the list of the apostles, you got Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. No, that's the Gospels. But when you start reading the list of the apostles, in every single list that you see when you read them, down at the bottom last is Judas, And it always says who betrayed him. It always reminds us that Judas was a betrayer. When you're reading the list of apostles, when the gospel writers wrote the books about the apostles, when they first wrote the gospel accounts, they included the idea that Judas was a traitor. That was an important thing for them to include, and there's truth to that. But we need to understand something else. Just like Peter, just like John, just like Matthew, Judas left everything, and we don't know how much that was, to follow Jesus. Judas left everything to follow Jesus, just like you and I. He named Jesus Lord of his life. He gave up his old life so that he could follow Jesus. We must remember that. Because if we forget that point, we forget the truth about Judas, and we find ourselves in a dangerous place ourselves sometimes. He left everything behind. We don't know how much he had, but he left it all behind to follow this itinerant preacher with a bunch of ragtag, uneducated buffoons following him around the countryside while he taught people. And the people that were following him only halfway believed in him. Half the stuff he said they didn't understand. They were worried about which one of them was going to be the most powerful, which one of them is going to be the greatest. Hey, can I walk on water with you? Let me be first. Let me be best. And yet he gave up everything to follow this Jesus with all his heart. Oh, he valued Jesus with no promise of anything on the other side. And near the end of Jesus' ministry, when Jesus says we're going back to Jerusalem, and by that time Jesus is a hunted fugitive in Jerusalem, they have already decided they're going to put him to death. It's so much so that Thomas puts it into words. Okay, let us go back with him and die. They knew exactly what was going to happen when they went back to Jerusalem. Jesus told them, we're going back to Jerusalem. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed. He's going to be put to death. And Thomas said, yep, let's go with him and we'll all die with him. That's what Thomas said. He understood it. But you know who went with him? Judas. It'd have been a good time to say, hey, Lord, I'd love to go with you, but I got plans this weekend. That week I've got plans. I've got to be wherever. But no, Judas went with him, knowing that the result was death. Judas went with them. Why? Because he valued Jesus. He had a great value. He set great store by Jesus. He had given up everything for Jesus. He was following Jesus with all his heart. Now, maybe he didn't understand who Jesus really was. Neither did the others. Maybe he thought that Jesus was going to set up an earthly kingdom and he would get a throne along with Jesus and help rule. So did the others. Maybe he thought that there would be fame and fortune at the end of it when Jesus was the king of the world and Jerusalem was delivered and all of them would be welcomed into the homes of the rich and famous. So did all the others. And by the way, there's people preaching that in the world today. If you follow Jesus, you're going to be famous and rich and all these other things. And so did the others. But it didn't happen that way. He followed Jesus with all his heart. He valued Jesus. He's willing to die with Jesus. You see that? Have you noticed that before when we talk about this guy? I see people looking at me like, dude, you don't even know who you're talking about. But it's true as we look at it. Most Christians believe that Judas was only following because he wanted the money. There's a kind of a thing in there. John makes it clear in John chapter 12 and verse 8 that after Mary had anointed him with the expensive oil, that Judas says, oh man, shouldn't have wasted all that money. All that money could have been used for the poor. And John says, it's because he used to dip into the till. And so, yeah, maybe he had a problem with money. There may be some problems there. But how much money do you think was in the treasury? How much money do you think was in the treasury of a bunch of unemployed people who didn't even have a roof over their head? I'll give you a hint. When they got to Jerusalem, they needed to pay the temple tax. Did Jesus go to the treasurer? Did he go to Judas and say, hey, we need money to pay the temple tax? No, he sent Peter out to catch a fish. How much was it? 2 small coins. They didn't have 2 small coins in the money bag. Judas wasn't getting rich off the treasury. We need to understand that. I think sometimes we get so caught up in what John said. He used to dip into the treasury. There wasn't anything to dip into. Maybe at times there were a few bucks. What Judas was thinking was, if all of this money had been sold, there would be money in the treasury. Then he could dip into it if he wanted to. His title, keeper of the treasury, was probably pretty much just an honorary thing. Just an honorary thing. I remember when I was in Koinonia back years and years and years ago, I got elected treasurer of Koinonia. And I said, oh boy, this is great. And I was excited because now I'm an officer. And so the very first meeting, the old treasurer turned over to me, not the checkbook because we didn't have a bank account. He gave me the bank bag. It had coins in it. It had over $1 in it, but it had less than $2 in it. And I was the keeper of the treasury. And the first thing they wanted me to do was buy t-shirts for all the incoming members that were pledges. We were going to give them all a t-shirt. It was $10 a piece for the t-shirts. So guess what my first job as treasurer was? To go to all the members and take up a collection so that we could raise enough money to buy t-shirts for our incoming pledges. That's a true story. That's the way it happened. That's the way Judas was. There wasn't any money in there. There wasn't any reason to be the treasurer just for the money. Now, did he have a problem with money? Apparently he did. Did money hold too high a priority in his life? Apparently it did. Did he value money? Yeah, he did. Don't you? Don't you value money? I mean, we use money to buy groceries with. We use money to pay our house payments with. We use money to take vacations with. We use money for everything we do. We value money. Maybe not too much. Maybe he valued it too much, but we value money to some extent. But he still valued Jesus. I believe he valued Jesus more than he valued money, at least most of the time. Most of the time. Understand this. Our values and priorities sometimes change. Our values and priorities sometimes change. You take somebody who's in really good health and all of a sudden they get a bad report from the doctor and their values and priorities change immediately. The money that might have been used for a vacation, if it needs to be used for treatment, is going to be used for treatment instead. The money that might have been set aside for the children after we die is used to help prolong our life sometimes. Our priorities have changed. Our values have changed. You know, one of the biggest priority changes and value changes in my life was one day when I decided that Gail and I were going to live together as husband and wife forever. That changed a lot of my values. That changed a lot of my life. I hunted less. I fished less. I went to work more. And I came home at night more. And I found happiness more because my priorities changed. You know what? When we found out Kristen was going to be born, our priorities changed again. When we found out Brian was going to be born, our priorities changed again. When the grandheathens came along, our priorities changed again. You know, life, our priorities, our values change throughout our lives sometimes. And I think that's what happened with Judas. His priorities changed. His values changed. He loved Jesus enough to leave everything to follow Jesus. But now he's at the end. And he realizes this is a dead end, literally. This is a dead end. You know, I've put all my value in the first floor, the basement of this house, and the river's rising. I need to get whatever I can of value and get it up to the next level. And as the river keeps going, I keep getting the most valuable things, and I keep moving them up, but the less valuable things are going to get left behind. And the things I can't move with me and take with me are going to be left behind. And that's kind of where we see, because the value of Jesus changed in his eyes. You know, Judas probably had this idea. Jesus is like a dead man walking. He's on borrowed time. Maybe he's like the wise steward that Jesus tells about, who realizes, hey, my time's about to come to an end. They've caught me. So you take your 100 measures of wheat and you write 50, and you take your measures and you write half. And he talks about the people of the world being wise in their ways. And maybe Judas was doing that. He was trying to be wise in the ways of the world and to understand. Because what value is there in a dead Messiah? What value is there in a dead leader? You know, we wonder sometimes what got into Judas. You say, well, Satan did, George. Duh, it's right there in the book. Well, we'll get to that in a second too. But can you imagine Judas sitting there alone? Not always alone, but alone, reaching down and feeling that bag that doesn't have the 2 coins to pay the taxes for the temple. Reaching down and realizing that there's nothing there. Looking over and thinking about Jesus, and that there's nothing left there either. And thinking, what will I do? I've given up everything to follow him. What can I do? There's no hope left here. There's no promise left here. There's no future left here. And in that despondent state, in that broken state, the only place he finds room is in the words of Satan, or in the temptations from Satan. Oh, at least you can get something out of this. At least get enough to get out of here. At least get enough to start over again, because this is going bad in a hurry. And so he gives up. He reaches in his pockets, it's empty. He reaches in the money bag, it's empty. He goes and talks to them, and they say, hey, here's a way out. Because he's despondent. He has no hope. You know, I've heard people say, you know, Satan entered his heart. How can it be that Satan entered his heart? Can Satan just enter your heart against your will? And the answer is, no, Satan can't enter your heart against your will. If you don't believe me, read Romans chapter 8. Neither height nor depth nor powers nor principalities nor things created nor things present, things to come. Nothing can separate you from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Read Romans 8 and realize there is nothing that can separate you from the love of God, but you can open your heart and let Satan in. And it goes both ways. If you'll remember, Jesus says in Revelation, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And if anyone will open the door to me, I'll come in and dine with him. Oh yeah. Jesus stands at the door and knocks, and he wants us to let him in. Satan stands at the door and knocks sometimes too. And sadly, in this case, he let him in because his priorities had changed. He still valued Jesus. But he's starting to weigh on the scales what's going to happen. And he sees the writing on the wall. And he realizes he's at the end of whatever hope there might be. And he says, it's better to have some than to lose it all. Kind of like the people during the stock market, when the stock market makes a great big crash and you see people and they run out and they sell everything they have because it's better to recover some of their money than to lose all their money. And they don't realize they don't actually lose money until they sell it. It's going to go back up most of the time. but they're desperate. And Judas was desperate. And I think sometimes we forget that. I think sometimes we think he was a bad man from the start. I think sometimes we think he was an evil man, just kind of a plant in among the apostles. I think sometimes we think that he was of no value whatsoever. You know what I see? I see at that Last Supper, Jesus giving Judas one more chance. One more chance. One of you here is going to betray me. What a great chance for Judas to say, oh, wow, that word, betray, that's not me. That's not who I am. I value Jesus more than that. I won't do that. But he did. And he didn't take advantage of that one more chance that he had. He wasted that opportunity. You see, the problem is Judas had misplaced his values over time. And the problem is sometimes in our lives that our values get misplaced. We come to the Lord with all our hearts and we say, Lord, I believe that you're the Son of God. I believe that salvation can only be found in you. I want to make you Lord of my life. I'm willing to submit to you in baptism to allow you to be the King of my life. I want my sins washed away in baptism. I want to start that new life that you've promised. I want to live for you, and I commit my heart to you for the rest of my life, and I give all I have to you. And then life happens. And our priorities change a little bit. And our values change a little bit. And being here every time the doors are open becomes a little bit of a burden. And singing becomes a little bit of a burden. And giving, seriously, God doesn't need my money. Yeah, giving becomes a little bit of a burden. And treating each other with love and dignity and respect becomes a little bit of a burden. And sharing our faith with those who are outside becomes a little bit of a burden. And our priorities change. And instead of it's all about God, it becomes all about me. And God can take the second seat. See, it's not just Judas. It didn't just happen 2,000 years ago. It happens in life all around us all the time. And yet there's still the promise. And yet there's still the hope. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Jesus is still there. Jesus is still wanting to be Lord of our life. Jesus is still wanting to be King of our life. And we can change our values. We've done it many, many times in our life. Our lives have been that way. We've changed our values. We've changed our priorities. We've decided this is the most important thing right now. Maybe it's going to college because I want to be a doctor and save lives. So the first priority, if I want to be a doctor and save lives, is I've got to get through college. But I can't just get through college. I've got to make good enough grades that I can get into med school. And then after I'm in med school, I have to work hard enough that I can finish med school so that now I can go out and change lives. But not only that, now I've got to do my residency so that I can go out and I can change lives. And now I've got to keep reading and studying day by day so that I can learn more because there's new things coming out all the time so I can save more lives. And our priorities have changed every step of the way. Oh, I just want to marry that good-looking red-headed girl. That changed my priorities. She didn't have real red hair back then. It was kind of brown color. It had some red in it. That's all I wanted, was to just marry that good-looking girl. And then, wow, I really do want to have a baby. I really do. And wow, I really do want to watch those kids. I want to baptize my children. Oh, I want that to happen. And that was such a great blessing. And I want to watch them grow up, and I want them to marry somebody that they'll love and that'll love them back and cherish them like I cherish their mother. See, my priorities change and change and change. And your priorities have changed and changed and changed. But let's not let our first priority become anything less than that. Perhaps you're not a child of God this morning. Let me tell you, there is nothing better in the world than being able to say, Jesus, you are Lord of my life, because he will bless you abundantly. Well, I don't believe in all this health and wealth stuff. I'm not preaching that at all. But I'm telling you, life will be so much better and fuller and richer. He said, I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly. That means now and in the future. Maybe you're a child of God and your priorities have been misplaced a little bit, and it's time to refocus on the main thing. Put the main thing. If you need to respond, won't you come while we stand and sing to encourage you?